Hey everyone, welcome back. In today's episode, we're going to be creating a virtual machine. And this time we're going to be building the foundations of our virtual network. So if you watch my other video about creating our first virtual machine, which happened to be a Windows 10 system, this one's going to be kind of similar, only we're going to be installing a router operating system. Now, I will post a link of the different router operating systems that you can download. There are several. There's OpenSense, which we'll be using today, PFSense, Untangle, Sophos UTM. There are several of them, and you could try all of them out if you'd like. The setup is generally kind of similar, but nothing that we'll necessarily be covering in today's episode. We won't be touching on too much of the actual configuration of the router itself, just getting it set up so that you have a network that's actually usable. I'll be covering more of the more in-depth networking stuff in our actual networking series. It's just that as a system administrator or a Homelabber, you're going to be expected to know or have rather a basic grasp of networking concepts, and that's pretty much what we're going to be focusing on today. Though thankfully for general setup of like servers and things like that, it isn't too complicated to set any of this up. So without further ado, let's get started. Now, if you remember our previous episode when I did mention a little tidbit about virtual machines and virtual NICs, Ethernet controllers specifically, you heard me mention that BSD operating systems actually have a little bit of a hard time when it comes to Hyper-V as of current, which is I think release 11, in that it doesn't really like the Generation 2 VM NICs. So we're going to be creating a Generation 1 VM, and I just wanted to get that out of the way so you kind of know why I'm doing it. So without further ado, we're looking at our screen here. This is our Hyper-V manager, and let's get started. So like I said, we're going to be installing OpenSense. So let's go over here. Oh, I actually want to show you too. Our Windows 10 lab is the OS that we installed a couple episodes ago, and we are actually going to switch this to LAN. If you remember, we had it set to WAN so that it could access the internet, and this time we're going to set it to LAN, and we'll get to why later, but we'll go ahead and set this to LAN and hit apply. Perfect. Alright, so let's get started. First, we're going to create a virtual machine, and we're going to name this guy router, and we're going to leave it Gen 1. Gig of RAM is fine. Routers actually don't take as much as you think. We're not actually going to be connecting it to a interface just yet, and we'll get to that in a minute. The actual router operating systems don't take up a ton of space, so we'll go ahead and tell it that I only want to use 10 gigs. And for this, we're going to be installing off of an ISO. So let's go ahead and pick that now. OpenSense 18.7, yep. And next, and finish. Let's create it. Perfect. So I'll leave a description on the installation instructions for OpenSense. We'll obviously be going over them here, but in case you want some reference material and you don't like my face or my voice, then you can just go read it on their website. So without further ado, let's connect to it and let's get started. So like most Linux distributions, OpenSense has like a live mode, but we're going to want to install it, and we'll get to that in a second. Let's hit start so we can boot it up. Alright, now it's going to boot into live mode and it's going to start its initializations. Now there's one thing that you might need to do, and that's rename the interfaces. I can briefly describe how to do that, and with any luck it might just automatically do it on its own, and I'll be sure to point that out for you. And what I mean specifically by that is when you know what, we actually don't have this ready to do what we need it to, so I'm going to shut it off. What I mean by that specifically is that sometimes when it boots up, it might not automatically pull the addresses or assign the addresses like it's supposed to the virtual NICs. And in order to do that, you need to manually assign the interface, like which one is LAN and which one is WAN, and I'll go over that in a second. First though, totally skip past this, sorry. we need to actually set up our router like we set up our other virtual machine. And that, if you remember during the configuration just now, we did not set a NIC, and we do need to do that. So let's go to settings. All right, perfect. So we have a NIC here already that's already applied to it. And we're going to call this guy LAN. And then we're going to add more hardware, and we want to add a second adapter. And we're going to call this one, whoops. We're going to call this one WAN. Alright, perfect. So we have our LAN and WAN network. Now let's just get some of this stuff out of the way. We do want configuration services. We don't want checkpoints. Alright, so this setting, when it comes to virtual routers, if you have a virtual environment, might be a little more important to you. Specifically if you have other virtual machines tied to the router to get internet. And there are some cases, although I don't know why, where people will bond their host machine to a virtual router. And if that's the case, then you are going to want this to automatically start, and you're probably going to want it to start first, so make sure that your startup delay is set to 0. So I don't want that though, so we'll just go ahead and hit nothing. And as for automatic stop action, again, I'm going to shut down the guest operating system. And this is more to the fact that a router is like a device that is always running, you know what I mean? It's constantly doing things, manipulating things, changing things. Unlike save the virtual machine state, you know, which is you know, almost like a hibernation to a physical system. For something like a router, you wouldn't want to do that, because even if you recovered that, you know, you started it back up, all of that information is like out of date, so it doesn't really make a ton of sense. So we'll just go ahead and shut down the operating system if I send it a shutdown command. Alright, so now I'm sorry, and we can go ahead and continue here. So we'll boot our machine back up and let it start up, and we're going to see if it automatically configures our network interfaces. And again, regardless of whether it does or not, I will touch on how to manually do it, and if it does, all the better. And I'll again show you where that happens. So just like any other Linux operating system, it's going to run through its boot technique. Now if you look here where it says HN1 link state changed up, and then up here it says HN0 link state changed up, and then it actually tells you that, you know, it's a network interface, you know, Hyper-V network interface on VM bus 0. Right, so it did detect both of them, and it did detect they were up. This is a good sign. It means that A, they can see it, Hyper-V can see it, and B, it's probably going to auto-assign addresses. So this shouldn't take too long, because Linux is honestly pretty quick. And let's see what we get here in a minute. So, why are we setting up a virtual router inside of, you know, a virtual environment? Well, this is going to help you segregate from your primary network, right? You might not necessarily, or the people living in your house necessarily, might not want you to be taking down their internet or using like a ton of bandwidth on, you know, your home router or your home internet, because it might affect other people's, you know, ability to use that bandwidth and use that internet, right? So, you know, it wouldn't be like a fantastic thing for, you know, your husband or your boyfriend or, you know, your wife, you know, to get angry with you because you're attempting to figure out how to do like a NAS transfer, and you know, their Netflix keeps buffering. So what this allows us to do is create a segregated like network that you can use specifically for your lab stuff, as well as give you the opportunity to play with some networking routers. So what we're actually going to be, you know, kind of doing today is I'm teaching you the foundations on how to create a virtual network so that you'll be able to take advantage of that, right? So if we see here, once it's done and it wants you to log in, we can see that LAN HN0, our network adapter name, and WAN HN1 actually pulled the right addresses, which is fantastic. You can see it automatically assigns the 192.168 scheme, and WAN, it actually pulled a address from my router, which it thinks is my ISP, which is fine. So if you wanted to install it, you would log in using installer, but I want to show you really quick what you would have to do if it did not see the IP addresses right here, right? If it somehow confused them, one of these would probably be blank because, you know, it's confused about it. So we're going to log in as root. So root is the default username and OpenSense is the default password for OpenSense. So we'll do root and then OpenSense. And I mean OpenSense is in like the way that their nomenclature. So OPN sense is the password. And as you can see, you are given a prompt with all the different options that you can do. And again, your LAN and WAN interfaces and addresses are given to you. If you wanted to fix them, you would hit 1 for assign interfaces. And once you hit 1, we'll go ahead and do it. It'll bring you through the walkthrough. We'll go ahead and actually kind of do this really quick. It won't make a difference in our scenario, but I do want to show you. So we're going to assume that one of them didn't show up or one of them was broken, and you think that somehow in Hyper-V those wires are swapped, and it's wrong. You know, it doesn't understand where it's supposed to be pulling an IP address from, and you need those two interfaces reversed. So the first question it's going to give you is, do you want to do VLANs? We're not going to. Right? Enter the WAN interface name, or A, for auto detection. So, as you can see here, HN0 has a MAC address and HN1 has a MAC address, so it sees there are two valid interfaces. And in our case, I actually don't remember what it is, so I will go ahead and hit, I will say that ours is HN1, right? So I will type HN1. Again, you can get this info right up here and hit enter. Enter LAN interface name is the second question, or hit A for auto detection. And we're going to hit HN0, and we're going to say that that's the LAN. Enter the optional one interface name, or A for auto detection. We'll just go ahead and hit enter here because we don't want to configure that. And now it's going to confirm it. The interfaces will be assigned as follows. WAN, HN1, and LAN will bond to HN0. Do you want to proceed? Yes. And then it'll do it. That's it. It'll run the configuration, it'll restart the DHCP and DNS services, and, you know, reverse those interfaces. And, you know, as you can see here, in my case, this is what you would see if you had done it incorrectly, right? You would see where it says WAN HN1, you know, would be blank, or perhaps LAN would be blank, and, you know, WAN would have an IP address. This scenario right here is why you would generally set an interface, you know, assign interfaces when you run into an issue like this. Now, I reversed them, I believe, so obviously mine is going to be broken now. But regardless, let's go ahead and log out. Because now what we're going to do is log in as the installer, because we want to make this persistent through reboots. We don't want to reboot off the disk all the time. And to install it, you log in as the user installer. And again, you would use the password OpenSense. So we'll do installer OpenSense. Perfect. Now it's going to walk us through the installation. Welcome to OpenSense 18.7. Just go ahead and hit OK. It's asking us if it wants us to keep settings or if we want to do something weird or custom. Just go ahead and hit that's fine. We'll do a guided installation. Hey, I found this disk. Do you want me to install to it? That's the 10 gigabyte disk we made earlier when we first set up this virtual machine. Yes. How do you want to do it? GPT or UFI mode? We're going to do this in MBR because we selected a Gen 1. And it's going to copy everything over. Now, after it installs, it's going to want to restart, and it's going to pretty much do everything that it did originally with the Live OS. And we'll get to that, you know, after the installation is done, which shouldn't actually take that long at all. And then finally, after it does boot up, it'll say that we are allowed to log in via the web interface and finish the guided wizard that will help us, you know, configure the router and get it running. And we'll go over that configuration as well, obviously. That way you guys can, you know, become accustomed to setting up a network. So the important thing about this that you should know so far, though, is in my case, it works out really well that my network, my home network, is so vastly different from the IP class that is by default used, the 192 scheme. That is used by a lot of routers though, so you might run into some conflicts. And if that were the case, I can show you how to change it. But if that were the case, if you do know for a fact that your physical home network uses the 192 scheme, you would run into problems having a second router on the network. And in order to avoid that, what you would do is you would create, we'll just go ahead and let this do it really quick while I show you in the background. You would create your second adapter, but right here you would not bond it yet. You would not bond it to WAN. You would go ahead and leave it as not connected, but physically there. And then you would install the operating system as normal with only one of the network adapters bonded to LAN. And after it's configured, you would go through the UI, the user interface, the web user interface, and you would finish setting up the router. And during that setup, it would ask you if you would like to change that naming scheme, in which case you would. That way they aren't contending, because that would literally, that'd be a very bad scenario. You wouldn't want to do that. Your network wouldn't appreciate it. The people relying on your network also probably would not appreciate it. That'd just be a bad day. So this is like moving right along here. Let's see what we got going on here. Let's take a look at our networking tab. All right, perfect. We don't have our memory demand or memory status yet because it hasn't been installed. And for those of you wondering, I know that it was just at 75 or 76% and it jumped back to 44, and that's only because it was just doing the next stage. So now it's going to ask us what password we want for our root password. And I will go ahead and we will name it password. Password, accept, reboot. Alright, and right here, it gives you instructions. After reboot, open a browser and navigate to 192.168.1.1 or the LAN IP address. We'll also be able to see this when it boots back up, so you don't necessarily have to memorize that. We're going to make sure our disk has been ejected. If it hasn't, you're going to want to manually do it. Perfect. And we'll go ahead and restart it just in case it was trying to boot off the disk again. And it looks like it was because our menus changed, so it's a good thing we did that. Not to mention that it kind of asked you to. Alright, so now it's going to go and boot up. And this is pretty much the same exact process as booting off of like the live CD. Not all of the router distributions will allow you to do that. Not all of them will run in live mode. I think the Sophos UTM is one of them, where it does actually require you to configure it before it'll do anything. We'll just let this start up. And again, for what we're doing, you don't need to generally, I mean in general, you don't need to give a lot of resources to a router VM. So 1 gig of RAM and like a 10 gig hard drive is great. We can actually see what the raw usage is right now. Let's take a look at how much disk space this VM is actually using. 2.5 gigs. Alright, so as we can see here, our LAN is 192.168.1.1, just like it said. And our WAN is some address pulled from my router. So we'll go ahead and exit this for now. It's going to stay running. We're just closing the console. And here's what I wanted to do now. So, the host machine is on a totally different network and we can't access this VM. So what do? Well, if you remember, we actually changed the Windows 10 VM to bond to LAN. And the reason being is now we can start this VM, load into Windows, and finish configuring our router. Because the router is connected to the LAN switch, and remember, we had a virtual switch where we created a LAN virtual switch that is internal only. So it's like literally connecting it to a physical switch. So if we log into Windows here, you can see we get a network prompt. Go ahead and allow that. That's fine. And you can see here that we have the internet. But let's look at the stats. Let's see who's giving us this. We'll hit details. As you can see too, it's a 10 gig link, right? 10 gigabit link. So this is going to be good if we have multiple machines running and we want to transfer data in between them. So let's do details, and we can see right here, IP address is 192.168.1.101, and their default gateway, DNS, and DHCP server are also 1.1. So our Windows 10 virtual machine is actually getting routing information and IP address assignment, as well as DNS from our virtual router. Now let's finish the configuration. So at this point, what we can do is we can just open up Internet Explorer here. Yep, we're loading the internet. Good. You know what? I'm curious, and you're probably curious too. So let's check it out. Now we don't have any ad block or anything on this, but let's take a look at speed test, right? So my house here has 150 by 150 fiber to the house. So let's see what we get out of a virtual machine running behind a virtual router on a host machine connected to my main network. Let's see what we get. Let's see if Internet Explorer will play with us here. I'm sure Internet Explorer has its place among some of you, but it just isn't me. Alright, well, let's see if Edge is any better really quick before I just nuke it and install something like Chrome or Firefox. Let's do speedtest.net. There we go, now we're doing something. Perfect. We're loading ads. Alright. And go. Let's see if it's anywhere close. Ping's good. Oh yeah. Oh, we're doing good. We're doing good. This is actually pretty good. Look at that. Look at that. Wire speed. Wire speed. And of course, a lot of this will depend on, who your speed test, what ISP or company your speed test is going through. But it's fantastic to know that doing get out of here. Get out of your speed test for Windows. Doing CFH Cable Inc. I am getting 150 by 163, which is pretty much my line speed. That is literally what I pay for. Even though I have no idea who CFH cable is. Obviously I use Frontier. So, with that done, cool, right? Okay, so now, let's open back up Edge here, and we are going to log into our router. So we will do it's what? 192.168.1.1. Let's see what we get. Nope. Alright. We're going to assume that it is secure, so we'll do HTTPS 192.168.1.1. There we go. Alright, continue to this web page. And there we go. There's our OpenSense UI. So let's log in. And that is root and OPN sense. Enter. Whoops. I lied. I forgot that we actually set a root password. So it's actually root And in my case, it is literally password for our example. Alright, awesome. So we are logged in and we'll go ahead and save that password. Welcome to OpenSense. Give it a minute to start. Awesome. Here's our wizard. It's auto starting for us. This wizard will guide you through the initial system configuration. This wizard may be stopped at any time, blah, 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 blah. I could technically stop it because it's already using the 192.168 scheme, whereas my primary network only uses 10 dot. But I'm going to assume right now that you do not have a WAN connection because you disabled that link because it is interrupting your home personal network. So to fix that, we're going to go through this so I can show you how that would be done. So we'll hit next. It's going to ask them some pretty basic questions. Hostname, OpenSense, domain, local domain. This is all fine. Primary DNS server, sure, I'll give you one. 2.8.8.8.8. And secondary is, sure, we'll do quad 9, 99999. DNS override. Allow DNS servers to be overridden by DHCP PPP on WAN. Basically, do you want your DNS server to be overridden by your ISP? No, uncheck. Do you want DNS resolver enabled? Yeah, you know, all of this is fine. So we'll hit next. Time zone, etc, yep. Time server host names. You can enter anything you want, like NIST, INST. The default is fine. Hit next. Selected type DHCP. Configure WAN interface is our step. Do you want me to get a DHCP address from your ISP? Unless you have a static connection and you are billed for a static connection through your ISP, you're going to want to leave this default. It's probably DHCP, i.e. anytime you lose power or every 6 weeks or whatever, your IP changes. So we'll just hit next all the way through this. The defaults are generally pretty safe. And right here, System Wizard, configure LAN interface. This is where we can configure what our IP scheme is for our internal router. Now, if you, on your network, had the same IP scheme, 192.168, 1 dot whatever, then what you would do to fix that is you could make this something really simple. For example, we could change that to a 2. So our first one became a 2, and we should be good. At this point, you would hit next, and it would, remember that setting. I'm going to go ahead and leave it 1, but we'll just pretend that you changed that to 2. And you would hit next, and we can leave this blank if we want to continue using the one that, we put in during the install. So we'll hit next again. And now it's like, hey, I need to reboot the router because you told me to change a couple things, and now I need to restart. Yeah, sure, go ahead. At this point, the router is going to restart, and at this point, if you had to change your LAN address, it would be changed after it came back up. Alright, so we got our congrats screen. We're all done. Let's go ahead and go to the dashboard and see what we got. What are we looking at? Cool. We got all sorts of stats, CPU usage, different types of memory usage, our links, LAN, WAN, our interface links. Perfect. This is great. So what would you do if you had to change your LAN address though? Because you don't, have any internet still, because you would have disabled that. Okay. If that's the case, after you've configured that, what you would do now is you would shut down. Okay, you would just shut off your router. You could easily do that. Here, I'll console in just to show you. We'll console in, and I would tell it. I would say, hey, shut down. And BSD understands this command, so it will cleanly shut off. See? Shutdown requested. So now it's cleanly shutting down. And once that's off, what we would do is we would go to settings, and on your network adapter that you have not set to not connected, we would just click on that and select WAN. And then we would hit apply, and then you'd be linked up to your main house, your physical network. And now, when we start the router, since it's going to be using a different IP scheme, not only will it pull the WAN address from your physical network, your home network, but it won't interfere with it because it's using totally different addressing. So that's great. Okay, so now that that's all figured out, that is how you install a virtual router. So we'll let this boot up, and we'll take just one more look at our Windows machine. And I think we're pretty much going to leave it there for today, right? Next up, what we're going to do is we're going to start, probably in our coming episode, start covering different things that we can do with server, right? We're going to start making our infrastructure. Once our network is ready to go and we can talk to things in our virtual network, now everything's going to be a piece of cake. Now we're going to be able to do some pretty cool stuff. And one last thing I wanted to go over before I let you go here, as far as the router is concerned, is again, like when I was installing it, if you enabled the WAN and booted it, and you cannot see, a WAN and a LAN address, then again, those connections might be reversed, but you don't need to worry about it. And you can do this through the GUI, but we won't cover how to do it through the GUI right now. Actually, you know what? It's easier through the GUI, so I will show you that. Let's hop back over to our Windows machine. Let's go ahead and just enter that address here. What do we got? Root. Password. Perfect. We would go to interfaces, right? And then assignments, and right here you could just reverse it. You could say, I want this to be 1 and this to be 0, and you'd hit save, and bam, you're done. But since we know that ours are right, we'll go ahead and leave them at the default. But like I said, when you re-enable that WAN link, if you don't see it, pull an IP address from your home network, that's what you're going to want to do. And it's literally as easy as logging into your network, your GUI, going to interfaces and then assignments and just swapping them. And then with any luck, you'd hit save. You'd probably need to restart, so I'll show you how to do that. After you'd hit save, it would probably say that you need to restart it, right? So you go down to power, reboot. It's pretty simple. Their menu is pretty intuitive. We'll be digging more into this probably in the networking series. For now, this is all you need to know. We won't be going too much into networking. We're going to be focusing on server and workstation, things like that in this series, the typical Homelabber stuff. And again, like I said, we are literally connected to our home network on 10 gig links, and the internet works absolutely fine. Our router works absolutely fine. That's all I wanted to go over with you today. I know it wasn't too in-depth, but one step at a time. So now you have the virtual machine that you made in our previous episode. And remember, this virtual machine, the Windows 10 virtual machine that we used, is bonded to the LAN. And in this episode, we created a virtual router. You set up the hardware requirements for your virtual router. You added a new NIC to your VM for your router. You booted your router, installed the operating system, and configured your WAN and LAN. And if you needed to, you configured it so it didn't interfere with your home network. That's a lot to achieve in one day. So I'm going to pause the video here. I hope you guys liked it. If you have any questions or comments, go ahead and put them below. Like I said, I'll throw you a couple of links for the various operating systems that you can use to do this. I won't be going over all of them, but I'll try and link you the actual installer pages. And I hope you guys have a great evening in my case. Have a good one. Bye.